live.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Carrie Linklater, and I am your chairperson this morning, and I am joined on the panel via Zoom by Ms. Diane Knight and Mr. Brent McIntyre. From our assessment department, we have Ms. Sharon Tang, and our administrative personnel is Ms. Twinkle Sharma. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. Board of Revision is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. This morning, we will be hearing items 3 to 8 on our docket. And Ms. Sharma, if you would please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony.
Sure. Madam Assessor, please state your full name.
Karen Tang.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Marcelo Navarro.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to provide at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma. Good morning, Mr. Navarro, and good morning, Ms. Tang. We will be starting with item number 3 on the docket, 30 Strauss Drive. We are looking at assessed value. And Ms. Tang, whenever you would like to start us off.
File number is 24-2334. Roll number is 0708116860. Address is 30 Strauss Drive. The assessed value for 2025 is $20,860,000. There are 6 buildings on the property with 2 to 3 stories. They were built in 1977. There are a total of 158 suites, 167 outdoor parking. Page 3 of my brief shows the subject property photos. Page 4 shows the allocation. And page 5 shows that there was no sale history within the 3 years prior to the effective date of the report. And page 6 shows the income valuation. So there are 61 bedrooms, 94 2-bedrooms, 4 3-bedrooms, and we use an average monthly rent of $1,181.64. Then we use 2.6% vacancy, 43.6% expense ratio, and 5.9% cap rate. and that gives us $20,860,000. Page 7 shows the comparable rent and locations, and 8 and 9 shows the cap rate studies. And page 15 to page 16 is the pictures for the subject property. And page 17 to page 20 is the subject property income and expense information. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Navarro?
Just in general terms, this was all model driven, and you did not change any parameters in this assessment?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in terms of your rent comparables, I'll note that this property is a mixture of walk-up apartment and individual garden-style units. Would you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. And are your comparisons that you have in your rent comparables specifically? Oh, you have some here. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
I just have two. Page 11. And this is more of a technical thing. Let me get there.
Okay.
So item number 2, I think that's a typo error, April 1st, 2021, for the reference date.
Yes, that was a typo, yeah.
And on the mailer, the outdoor parking stalls is shown as 229, and yet you're showing it as 167. I'm not sure if you know why there's a discrepancy there.
I'm not too sure.
No, that's fine. I just noticed the two differences.
Okay.
All right, that was my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. And Ms. Knight, any questions?
No, ma'am.
I am just wondering, Ms. Tang, your pictures that you have on pages 15 and 16, do you know when those were taken?
I'm not too sure. I just Googled the property. I think this is the photos available that's on their leasing company's website. So I would assume they're pretty recent, but I don't know the exact date the pictures were taken.
Okay. And you have a effective age of 1977 on this property, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Would you agree by looking at these photos that the property is looking quite dated?
I do agree, but we don't have any permits on file for us to inspect the properties, and I don't know the last time the property was inspected, so the record is probably out of date. If we do inspect the property, we might update the information, but that will be something that we'll be looking at after the appeal season.
All right. Thank you. And as stated, you said your brief was model-driven. So you don't know whether you've got a 2.6 vacancy on this property?
That's correct.
Okay, so, which is model, so you don't know whether this property is experiencing any vacancy?
Sorry, I'm just trying to look at their income and expense information. So I'm looking at their income and expense, but I don't really see anything that they reported for the vacancy portion. But for us to use the 2.6%, we would just be looking at what we have in the neighborhood, and based on the property type and the age, then we would assign the vacancy rate for this type of building.
Right, okay. Sorry, and your cap rate also is long-term, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Ms. Tang. Mr. Navarro?
Yeah, I will start momentarily. Okay, so we're looking at 30 Strauss Drive, and this would be in the St. James area, just north of Ness Avenue. This was not inspected. However, we did review as much of the property as we could using the materials that we have. That is actually noted on page 4. On page 6, you can see an overhead picture of the property. On page 7, you can see the general area. And on page 7, you see one street view picture, and this is part of the property, and this is an interesting type of property because it's not just an apartment building. So you can see the walk-up apartment there. But over on the next page, on page 8, you can see that it's also a mixture of garden suites. And on page 9, you can see a description of the property. So why don't we just turn to the income approach? And I can just ask you to turn to page 17. That's probably the best look at this property in terms of what we've done. So we've taken 3 years and stabilized them, and we also produce an average. And I don't think I need to explain this process. You've probably seen it hundreds of times from all this group. So we look at it from more of a site-specific perspective. So from our stabilized potential market gross rent, you can see that the average of the 3 years that we looked at was $1,955,000. We've taken the higher year at 2022 as the stabilized number at $2,043,238. Vacancy is noted at 3%, and that is based on the 3 years that we've looked at. So if you'd like to find the vacancy for year 2022, you can actually find it on page 32 of the brief. And at the top, that notes the residential vacancy. So we're slightly above the city at 3%. That's based on, again, the averaging out and then the stabilizing of that vacancy figure. We also include figures for bad debt and slight adjustment at 0.7%. So we get an effective gross rent of $1,967,543, to which we add, again, stabilized other sources of income like laundry and parking, and also miscellaneous sources of income. So in the end, the effective gross ends up being $2,079,728. Now, in terms of the net operating income, obviously we apply an expense ratio. Now, the overall expense ratio is 53.5%. We feel that this is warranted for a 1977 vintage building. We have the ages being 1977. 43.6% from our perspective is closer to newer apartment buildings in terms of the expense ratio. However, we can look at the expense ratio on page 18 and look at the repair and maintenance. So that is one of the largest adjustments in terms of the expenses overall. And at the bottom, you can see how much we're allocating on a per suite basis for repair and maintenance, and that's $3,003. And that is based on an adjustment to the average that we see. So you can see that the R&M less CapEx in WNS is 474,551, and again that works out to $3,003. So if we flip back to page 17, so we see the typical adjustments for example, insurance. Generally, for the most part, on things like insurance, management fees, we always go for 5% for management, and the insurance tends to be the most recent year. The only ones that we tend to stagger or fluctuate are the expenses that go up and down over the years, so that would be your utilities and your waste and snow removal, because those can, again, go up and down on an annual basis. And in terms of taxes, generally speaking, it's the most recent year that we look at. So again, our total expenses are $1,113,194. That works out to a 53.5% expense ratio, and a net operating income of $966,535. In terms of the capitalization rate, at 5.75, that's slightly lower than the assessors. And if you turn back to our page 15, you can see that for the effective age of the year property, the year built, is 1970 to 1989. And our cap rate ranges between 5.50 and 6.25. So we've actually gone on the lower side of our own scale, and that's because we view this as a reasonably good property. I noticed the pictures in the assessor's brief. I haven't confirmed the condition of the property itself, so I know often that the management companies put up marketing photos that are standardized. They're not necessarily a reflection of what's there. We can assume that certain updates have been made to the property over the years, and that, again, that's reflected in our cap rate. It is a 1977 building, but nobody's going to get the 1977 experience if they walk into these units. So over time, these properties undergo changes, and that's typically reflected in the rent. That's where you're going to capture those changes for the most part. So we think at 5.75 and the net operating income that we've stabilized over 3 years, this is the proper reflection of the value for this site. Now in the appendix, we've just included the income expenses that were submitted. Again, we reviewed more than 1 year. We've only submitted 1 year because we are looking at showing that the owner was compliant and did submit. So I am open for questions.
Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Kang?
Yeah, just a few. So for your income and expense calculation, I'm just wondering what your value would be if you used 5 year to calculate your stabilized income and 5 year to stabilize your total expense, instead of using the 3 years for the income and 5 year for the repair and maintenance, and everything else use the 3 years.
Yeah. Specifically, I can't answer that because I didn't look at 5 years. So my answer for you would be completely baseless because I didn't do that analysis. However, looking at what's happening there, I can probably say that we would have stabilized it somewhere around 50%.
Okay. On page 6 of your brief, so it shows the aerial photo of the property. Are you aware that the condo below the subject property were being sold about $183,000 per unit for the similar size in 2022?
So, I'm not. However, we are looking site-specific at this property, so if the parameters of that property are exactly the same as this property, for example, it is a mixture of walk-up apartment and garden suites, then it's something that we would look at. However, based on the performance of the property over 3 years and the capitalization rate that we put on it, which again, I'll stress it, it is more favorable than the cap rate that you've used in the model. So I don't think there's anything wrong with our valuation.
So the requested value is on page 2 is $16,809,000, which work out to be about $106,000 per suite. Do you have any sales to support that valuation?
No, we don't use typical sale values per suite. I don't believe that's been a common practice for anyone to use a sales comparison approach.
Okay, but you don't have any other sales comparison for the square footage either, or similar properties to show sales?
Not a
for
metric
similar
we generally
properties?
look at.
Okay, I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight, any questions?
I was just looking at your expenses, but I think I figured it all out now, so I'm okay.
All right, thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
I have a few, just to confirm that you don't have any rent comparisons on your information submitted today?
No, so typically, I think, Mr. McIntyre, what we've done in the past, and that's for every Altus/Ryan agent who's worked on apartment buildings, we typically do the 3-year stabilized. We don't provide rental comparisons. There are some exceptions to that rule, though. So if we have an apartment building, for example, that is perfectly new, where we don't have the most recent rent roll to provide, because it is post-reference date information, in those situations we will either provide one of two, either rent comparisons or CMHC rents. In this example, this property is old enough that we can look at the typical operating history of the property and provide our analysis based on that, but the two exceptions are those that I noted.
Okay, thank you. I just have one other question on page 18. If you look at the R&M per suite for previous years up, they're consistent 3,000, 4,000, 3,000, 3,000, and then the last year, almost $9,000 per suite.
Correct. So there would have been an abnormal amount of CapEx at that point that we probably would have looked at and drawn out of the R&M study.
So I think the question is do these suites undergo significant renovations given the fact that their R&M per suite doubled?
I would say so. I would say that at 9,000, if you're looking at 9,000 per suite, if you're looking at it from the per suite basis, that would indicate some renovations possibly, or some larger CapEx issues. I'll stress though that a higher than normal CapEx in 1 year can indicate a lot of things. It can indicate that, yes, suites have undergone renovations, or it can indicate other things, for example, a roof repair or something like that. And that can throw the numbers off, which is one of the reasons that we look at them over those 5 years and stabilize them. But to your point again, we did acknowledge that this property has been renovated over time, which is why we gave it a more favorable cap rate.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. My questions have been asked and answered. Does either party have a wish for a summation? Ms. Tang?
No, thank you.
Mr. Rivera?
I don't, thank you.
All right. We will move on to item number 4, which is 35 Strauss Drive. And Ms. Tang, whenever you are ready.
file number is 24-2339. Roll number is 0708115020. The assessed value for 2025 is $18,491,000. There are 5 buildings with 3 stories. They were built in 1974. There are 145 suites and 155 outdoor parking. Page 3 and 4 shows the subject property photos and locations. Page 5 again shows that there was no sale history 3 years prior to the effective date of the report. And page 6 shows the evaluation. So there are 54 one-bedroom, 91 two-bedrooms. And we use the monthly rent of $1,144.28. And again, we use a 2.6% vacancy, 44.22% expense ratio, and 5.85% cap rate. And that gives us $18,491,000. And page 7 is the comparable rent and locations. And 8 and 9 is the cap rate study. And again, on page 11, there was an arrow, so the reference date should be April 1st, 2023. And page 15 to page 17 shows the subject property photos, and page 18 to 22 is the income and expense information for the property. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, any questions?
This was all model driven.
That is correct.
Okay. And I believe that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Ms. Knight?
No, ma'am.
I also have no questions. Mr. Navarro, if you'd like to proceed.
Thank you. This is 35 Strauss Drive. And if you turn to page 6 and 7, you can see a similar type of layout that we had in the previous brief, and that's also associated with the fact that these properties are located next to each other. The general area on page 7 is as well, and outside pictures. In this case, we didn't inspect. There is a small description on page 9. But as with the other one, I will ask you to turn to page 17. And so we have a year built on this property being 1974, 3 stories, and again, it is a mixture of several blocks here. And the suite count that we have is 1 bedrooms at 54, 2 bedrooms at 91, for a total of 145 suites. In terms of the potential income, you can see there that we've stabilized 3 years again. Same process as the previous one, $1,912,041 in terms of the stabilized income. So in this case, again, we have vacancy. I can point you to the page that the vacancy is laid out, but it is in the income and expenses that I've noted. In this one, we're slightly less than the city. So in terms of vacancy, I don't believe there's too much of an issue. We have $13,344 in bad debt. That creates an effective gross rent of $1,850,895, and to which we add other sources of income. Of course, there is $27,408 for laundry, parking income, and miscellaneous sources as well. So the effective gross income in the end is $1,951,263. Now, in terms of the the expenses, very similar expense ratio, 53.4%. That's not purposely done; it just happens to land there. So, if we want, we can take a look at the expense ratio and the R&M study on the back. Similar type of process. Again, we look at 5 years. We stabilize, we create an average, and then we stabilize. And this works out to $368,962 or $25.45 per suite, which is about $500 less per suite than the previous example. Now, again, if we flip back to page 17, our expense ratio is 53.4. That's not surprising, really. When you look at the fact that these properties are next to each other, they're probably operating very, very similarly in terms of their R&M cycle. They're probably quite similar. The broad tenant profile is probably very similar. What I would add is that this one probably has just a slight amount more of amenities, but it's not showing that it's being neglected in any way. It just happens that these types of units sometimes have higher R&M. I'm not sure if it has a pool. I know that the assessor's picture has a pool in it. I don't know if they confirmed whether there was a pool in it, but I would assume so. Just from the pictures there, again, the suite does look kind of dated as well in terms of the assessor's pictures. I'm not going to go by that. We think that this is a very similar property to the last one, which is why we assigned a very similar cap rate to it at 5.75. So it creates an end value of $15,814,097 or $15,814,000. Beyond this, it's the same stuff. Same stuff that we've included in all of our briefs today. So you'll see that we noted the 1 year of income and expenses, and primary reason for that is that we just want to include that to show the board that they have been compliant, but note that we have looked at more than 1 year of income and expenses. So I am open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. Ms. Tang, any questions?
I guess just one regarding to the repair and maintenance. So I guess I'm just comparing with the previous property that we just talked about, and it looks like this property has a lot more. It looks like there's more roofing repairs, there's more window and doors replacement, and flooring replacement. I'm just wondering, so you believe that this property has a similar condition compared to the previous property we just talked about?
I would think so, yeah.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight?
No, ma'am.
I also have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does either party have a wish for a summation?
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you. We will move on to item number 5, which is 130 Strauss Drive. And Ms. Tang, whenever you'd like to proceed.
File number is 24-3343. Roll number is 0708116770. Address is 130 Strauss Drive. The assessed value for 2025 is $22,235,000. There are 7 buildings, and there are 1 to 2 stories. It was built in 1984. There are 154 suites and 154 outdoor parking. Bottom page 2 and page 3 shows the subject property photos and locations. And page 4 shows that there was no sale history. And page 5 shows the evaluation. So there are 56 one-bedroom, 92 two-bedrooms, and 6 three-bedrooms. And we use a monthly rent of $1,231.41. Then we use 2.6% vacancy, 42.82% expense ratio, and 5.7% cap rate. And that gives us $22,235,000. And page 6 shows the comparable rent and locations. And page 14 to page 21 shows the subject property photos. And page 22 to 26 is the income and expense information for the subject property. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Tang. Any questions, Mr. Navarro?
Just judging by your picture on page 2, Ms. Tang, would you agree that this is more of a garden-style apartment layout?
Yes.
Okay. And the rest of it is all model-driven, and you haven't adjusted any parameters?
That is correct.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight, any questions to the assessor?
It's all been updated, has it?
From the picture, it looks like it.
And have all the suites been done, or just some of the suites?
I'm not sure. This is just a picture from the website to show a few pictures, but I'm not sure if all the buildings have been done or not.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
I also have no questions. Mr. Navarro, if you would like to proceed.
Okay. We're looking at 130 Strauss Drive, and again, this is in that very similar area as the previous two properties. You can take a look at the overhead pictures on page 6 and 7 for the general location, and 2 pictures on page 8, again showing the general type of layout for these types for this property, which is more of a garden style apartment layout. Again, I'll ask you to turn to page 17. So this building, this complex, was built in 1984, which is about 10 years after the previous two that we've looked at. And in terms of the suite complement, we have 56 one-bedroom, 92 two-bedrooms, and 6 three-bedrooms. And I noted that there are no basements in these. So if we look at the income, similar type of process, potential market gross rents were stabilized at $2,250,332. We have slightly higher vacancy based on those years that are reviewed at 106,454 stabilized, and that is about 4.7%. Bad debt of 18,881, or about 0.8%. So we have an effective gross rent of 1,124,997. In this case, we've only included parking as additional income. There is no laundry income. You'll note that, again, this is predominantly garden units, so you don't have that communal income from a laundry room that you would in an apartment style, where you get that additional income stream, meaning that these units would probably have laundry inside them or not. So in terms of expenses, we are very similar to the other two at 53.2%. Now in terms of the stabilized R&M, we're at 3173, which is slightly higher than both of the previous examples. We can turn to page 18 to look at that. So we note that, for example, for roof repairs, there's clearly something done at year 2021. And you can see that the expenses for roof shot up at that point, meaning that there's probably some more substantial roof repairs that were done at that point. We've stabilized them down to $19,879. Hot water tanks, $11,054. And again, for most of the R&M, we've typically taken a look at the 5 years and stabilized those. So the stabilized is 488,665, works out to 3173 per suite. And adding those back to the page 17 where we get the layout of the valuation, the total expenses are $1,174,765, or 53.2%. So the net operating income becomes $1,033,387, and we've applied a capitalization rate of 5.50 to this one. So the end value is $18,788,860, or $18,789,000. Now, briefly, as an explanation on the cap rate, again, we've gone slightly lower than the assessor has. And our date for this bracket of properties ranges between 1970 and 1989, 5.5 being the better side of this cap rate. So we assigned it at 5.5. From our perspective, it's slightly better in terms of the age. Obviously, some repairs and maintenance have been done to it. Likely some improvements in terms of the capital as well. So we think this value is fair. And beyond this, the standard items, we've included the income and expenses for the 1 year. We've reviewed more, but again, we're showing that the owner has been compliant. So I am open for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro. Ms. Tang, any questions?
I have no questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight, any questions?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
And Mr. McIntyre?
I just have one relating to outdoor parking count on the mailer on page 31. That the owner returned, it's showing 204 outdoor parking spots, whereas the assessor has 154. There seems to be quite a discrepancy between the two.
That is what we've been reported on. However, because this is a garden-style apartment, you would probably think that the ratio would be more than just 1-to-1, allowing for slightly more in terms of parking spots for guests and stuff like that, plus maybe a few more parking spots for those people that require more than one parking spot. So I don't think every unit, every apartment fits into that perfect 1-to-1 ratio.
So that would affect parking income if, in fact, most of those parking stalls were rented?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you. And Mr. Navarro, I think you stated that you did not inspect this property.
Yeah.
So just looking at your income and expenses, with it looks like renovations they've done to the suites. You can't speak to how many were done, is the whole building completed, etc.?
No. I think, having said that, Joe, the R&M actually does provide us some insight into that. Okay, so you can see that there are some jumps, for example, in the roof repair. 93,040 is a jump from the previous years, and that's pointing to some more significant roof repair. However, even from that perspective, if you were to do a complete roof replacement on this type of property, you would be looking at a substantially higher amount. Okay, so that tells us that this is ongoing. That probably this year they did more roof repairs than they did on a typical year. And you know, it's it's basically saying that this company is probably keeping up with most items on this property. That's reflected in the R&M per suite that they're spending, and reflected in the rents that they're charging. So this is a well-maintained building, and it's being reflected in the cap rate. So that's what it is.
All right, and thank you. That's all my questions. Does either party have a wish for summation?
No, thank you.
No, but
Good. All right. We will move on to item number 6, which is 141 Strauss Drive. Looking at assessed value, and Ms. Tang, whenever you're ready to proceed.
File number is 24-2347. Roll number is 070812000100. Address is 141 Straits Drive. The assessed value for 2025 is $12,449,000. There are 5 buildings, and there are 2 to 3 stories. It was built in 1978. There are 112 suites and 142 outdoor parking. Page 2 and 3 shows the subject property photos, and page 5 shows the evaluation. So there are 36 one-bedrooms, 62 bedrooms, 16 three-bedrooms, and we use a monthly rent of $1,029.32. And again, we use 2.6% vacancy, 48.26% expense ratio, and 5.6% cap rate, and that gives us $12,449,000. And page 6 shows the comparable rent and locations. And 7 and 8 is the cap rate study. And page 14 to page 16 shows the subject property interior photos. And page 21 to page 17 to page 21 is the income and expense information for the property. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, any questions?
I'm sorry, can you just give me the cap rate that you used?
I think. Okay, so it's on page 5, so it's 5.6%.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions, Ms. Knight?
No, ma'am.
And Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
I also have no questions. Mr. Navarro, if you would like to proceed.
Okay. So we have 141 Strauss Drive. And on page 6 and 7, you can see some outside pictures of this and the general location maps. You can see that this is, again, that type of garden-style apartment. So these would be individualized units. And we can turn to page 17, as we have with the others. So this property was built in 1978. Again, as I stated previously, probably not a 1978 looking building. Those updates have been made over the age, and that is typically captured in the rent. So in terms of the suite complement, we have 36 one-bedrooms, 62 bedrooms, and 16 three-bedrooms for a total of 112 suites. You can see the income that we have there, stabilized again over 3 years, with stabilized at $1,387,509. Vacancy is 2.5%. That debt is 0.2%. That gives us an effective gross rent of $1,349,172. We have laundry and parking in this situation. That indicates that there is either pay laundry in these individualized units, or there is a laundry type center, communal laundry type center that they're deriving income from. Parking is $51,853 and miscellaneous income at $9,025. So the effective gross income is $1,427,169. In terms of the expense ratio, this is 60.8. I will admit that this one is high in terms of the expense ratio. So ideally, what I would want to see is something around 50.3, 50.2, or sorry, 52 or 53%, like we have for the others. And in terms of the capitalization rate, we've based it on primarily on the overall age of the property, the garden suites. So we've given it a rate of 5.75. The assessor's cap rate has gone down to 5.6. This was an interesting curveball compared to the others. However, yes, I would admit that the expense ratio is slightly high on this, and we would probably want to see something more along the lines of 52 or 53%. Other than that, in terms of the parameters that we've used, I think we're fine. We've suggested $9,736,36, but again, as I've stated, I do think that the expense ratio is a bit high on this one. So I am open for questions.
Thank you. Ms. Tang, questions?
I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
No, I have no questions, thank you.
And Ms. Knight?
No, thank you.
I also have no questions, but I am going to redirect you, Ms. Tang. Just want to confirm that your brief was model-driven, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Does either party have a wish for a summation?
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
All right. And panel, are you okay to continue with our last two items, or would you like to take a short break?
I'm good.
I'm good.
You're good? All right. Thank you. We will move on to item number 7, which is 200 Ronald Street. And Ms. Tang, whenever you are ready to proceed.
File number is 24-2798. Roll number is 0707170370. The assessed value for 2025 is $45,743,000. There are two buildings. One is 1 story, the other one is 16 stories. It was built in 1967. There are a total of 298 suites, 15 indoor parking, and 223 outdoor parking. Again, turn to page 6 of my brief that shows the evaluation. So there are a total of 39 bachelor suites, 141 one-bedroom, 105 two-bedrooms, 12 three-bedrooms, and then we use a monthly rent of $1,420.40. And then we use a 2.6% vacancy, 41.09% expense ratio, and 6.35% cap rate. And that gives us $45,743,000. And page 7 shows the comparable rent and locations, and 8 and 9 is the cap rate study. And page 15 to page 20 shows the subject property interior photos and utilities and amenities. And page 21 shows the income and expense information for the property. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Tang. Questions, Mr. Navarro?
I don't believe, other than it's model-driven completely, no adjustments on parameters.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McIntyre?
I just have one question on parking on page. You're not parking the suite count. On page 1 you have 298, and then on page 6 it's 297. Is that to take into account in a leasing office? And that's okay if you're not sure.
I'm not too sure. I think it's possible that one building with a one-story was not included into the total count. Because there are two buildings, so one building with a one-story, the other building with the 16 stories. So it's possible that when they're generating the income, it's only the one that was showing up.
Okay, that's fine. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Ms. Tang, I just have some questions in regards to your subject photos on this property. It looks as though, there's been some updating. This is the 1967 building, correct?
Yeah, according to our record, that's correct.
Okay, so I guess I'm just wondering why you have an effective age, I believe, of 1967.
Again, probably because we don't have a permit for the renovation for the property, so we didn't inspect the property and update the record.
Okay. Do you know the last time the property was inspected?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Navarro, if you'd like to proceed with your brief.
Sure. This is 200 Ronald Street. On page 2, you can see our assessment summary. 1967 is the effective age, according to the city. On page 6, you can see the general location, outside pictures of the property, a description on page 8. What I would comment on the condition of the property is that it's been updated, and again, with any type of apartment building, whatever age it was built in. The bones are from 1967, but realistically, most of the items in this property have probably been replaced, at least the CapEx items. The roof, all of those systems have been updated. And the suites are obviously based on the pictures that the assessor is posting in her brief. Those have been updated as well. So this would tend to lean more on the side of a properly maintained building over time. Now, I will note that the property is high in amenities, and it's also, 16 stories. So that in itself would create a need to do more repair and maintenance over time. Capital items. So there is some more risk to having these taller buildings, and that would be reflected in the cap rate that we chose. So I'll ask you to turn to page 16 in this case. So we have the age as being built in 1967, and that's all it is. That's 1967. What I will comment on in terms of the effective age is that, as I've been stating, most of that is being captured in the rent. And over time, that's why rent changes, because they're constantly doing maintenance to it. We typically don't really change the effective age on these properties simply because it's a different exercise when you're looking at effective age. If you're looking at it from the perspective of cost, then you can enter those parameters into your costing and adjust the effective age. But in the income approach, those things are generally reflected in the income of the property and the cap rate that you assign to them. So even with the lack of a proper effective age, really, we are noting that in our income approach. So, sorry if I just take a second to clear my throat.
Do you need some water? It's behind you.
No, I don't think water will help me. Yeah. I think I'm good to go now. I think I cleared it. So for this property, and again, we have 297 suites as noted in total. We have a stabilized potential of 4,454,268. We have a vacancy of 4.4%. Again, that is based on the 3 years that we looked at and then stabilized. And we have additional sources of income. So we have laundry income and we have parking income. That creates an effective gross income of $4,686,957. That is roughly $13.1508 per suite. Now, in terms of expenses, this property created an overall expense ratio of 45.6%. On a per suite basis for R&M, that worked out to $1,935 per suite. And if you turn over to page 17, you can see the R&M study. And again, 5 years collected here and reviewed, where we've averaged out. There are some things that stand out. Obviously, the extraordinary repairs, which could have been anything. It could have been a roof, could have been a new liner in a pool, could have been many things. It averaged out to $586,960, but obviously you can see that those items were excluded. And then we've averaged out what we see as typical, and we stabilized property. So from our perspective, we think that we've stabilized properly over the 5 years. That works out to $574,570 or $1935 per suite. Total expenses are $2,135,870. Again, that is 45.6%. The net operating income is $2,551,086. And in terms of the capitalization rate, we've assigned a capitalization rate of 6% to this. Indicated value is $42,518,104 or $42,518,000. Beyond that, we've included some of the same items, the income and expenses for the 1 year to show that they've been compliant. And other than that, I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Ms. Tang, any questions for Mr. Navarro?
Just one for parking. So on page 16 of your calculation, so it shows that the parking is 194 indoor and 12 outdoors. When was the last time you inspected the property?
I haven't inspected the property, so I can't speak to it.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight?
Miscellaneous income, what is that?
We don't have any miscellaneous, but that can be, good question. So that would possibly be, for example, fees for using some of the amenities. They may have, for example, a party room, that type of thing. So in this situation, it could be other sources other than the laundry and parking.
Like all your other buildings has miscellaneous income, quite sufficient.
Yeah.
And this one has none.
It did not, no.
Just very different to me, that's all. Great, thank you.
And Mr. McIntyre?
No, I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation? Ms. Tang?
No.
I guess I just kind of want to point out for the parking, it does show that the parking has been updated from 194 outdoor and 12 indoor to 223 and 15. So we just want to point that out to the board.
Was that a summation or just a point?
That's just a point. We do have the record showing that the information has been updated, and we inspect the property with one of the agents from Altus to count the parkings.
So, just to comment on that, you do note that we value it based on the income that it generates. So, while we may not have the count correct, we are basing it on the actual income that those parking stalls are generating.
Yeah, that's why I just wanted to point it out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So, back to the summation. No summation, Ms. Tang?
No submission.
And,
No summation, thank you.
all right, thank you both. So we'll move on to the last item on our docket, which is item number 8 at 233 Booth Drive. Ms. Tang, whenever you're ready to proceed.
File number is 24-2708. Road number is 0707170410. The assessed value is the assessed value for 2025 was $41,829,000. There's one building with 16 stories. It was built in 1968. There are 310 suites and 207 indoor parking. Page 5 shows the evaluation. So there are 25 bachelor suites, 168 one-bedroom, and 117 two-bedrooms. And we use a monthly rent of $1,324.44. We use the vacancy of 2.6%, and we use 44.65% expense ratio, 6.35% cap rate, and that gives us $41,829,000. And page 6 shows the comparable rent and locations, and 7 and 8 is the cap rate study. And page 14 just shows the floor plan for the suites, and page 15 is the income and expense information for the property. And that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Rivero?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Ms. Knight?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. I also have no questions. Mr. Rivero, if you would like to proceed.
I'll just ask you all to switch to or go to page 16. So same type of process as we have with the previous properties. We've stabilized the income over 3 years, $4,510,344. Vacancy at 3.7%. The effective gross rent is $4,341,630. Laundry income plus parking income, that creates an effective gross income of $4,801,798. Our expense ratio is 47.3%. That is on the R&M. That is stabilized at $1,897 per suite. And the total expenses are $2,270,711. The cap rate was set at 6.15. Realistically, this should have the same cap rate as the previous one, at 6%. If we are going to be consistent, and it's not at 6%. And if it goes at 6%, it's above the assessment. So I would say that the property probably shouldn't have been appealed. So I will leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Ms. Tang, any questions?
I have no questions.
Thank you. And Ms. Knight?
No, ma'am.
And Mr. McIntyre?
I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you. Just one question. In terms of this property on Booth, it's a sister property to the one on Ronald, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. That's all my questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation? Ms. Tang?
No, thank you.
And
Thank you very much.
All right. All the items have been heard on our docket this morning, and this hearing is adjourned. Ms. Tang, I'd like to thank you for your time and your brief, and also to you, Mr. Navarro.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we're out early.